how much more productive could a team be if they understood the impact of power dynamics? Directly supports organisations to meet ISO's PDCA cycle. I'm really excited to see how much of an impact it's going to make. The way in which this framework can be applied is really broad and it can have massive organisational impact. It's called the SEAS framework. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Yorkshire Business Podcast. We feature bright and brilliant businesses from across Yorkshire. And it sounds a bit awkward actually, because today, featuring myself and my own business on the podcast, but not without very good reason. I'm here to talk about a really exciting development and milestone in my own business. My name's Chloe. I'm the founder of OneSource HR and I'm the host of the Yorkshire Business Podcast.
So, Chloe, tell us about the big news coming out of OneSource HR.
OneSource HR have registered what will be the first trademarked continuous improvement framework for the prevention of sexual harassment at work. It's called the SEAS framework. And yeah, it's really exciting. I'm really excited to see how much of an impact it's going to make. I've been really inspired to develop a continuous improvement framework, partly from my experience working across manufacturing and engineering environments. That's where the majority of my career's been spent, and sort of prior to that as well, working in quite regulated environments, such as environments that are regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. All of those environments have been quite highly systemised and compliance driven. Quality improvement is really embedded into everything that they do in those sectors, from quality, health and safety, performance. And it really struck me how powerful that mindset could be if it was to be applied to preventing workplace sexual harassment. So what I've also noticed is that often organisations approach harassment prevention, and especially sexual harassment, because it's a tricky subject, right? Either retrospectively after an incident has already occurred, or from a place of fear and compliance rather than from true prevention. I think it can feel a little bit stigmatised, a little bit daunting, and a little bit uncomfortable as well. So businesses often don't even know where to start to kind of have this conversation. And because of that, they either avoid the issue entirely, or they kind of fall back onto box-ticking exercises that are not sustainable and don't create meaningful change. And, you know, being quite commercially driven, I hate to see any organisation sort of wasting money on training or learning solutions, frameworks, policies that aren't having any kind of tangible impact on their culture or on the topic. So I really wanted to find a way to remove the stigma and lower that barrier for organisations to be able to start to engage in conversations and efforts around preventing sexual harassment and sexual misconduct at work. And that's why the SEAS framework is a continuous improvement framework. Employers are already familiar with continuous improvement in their business. It's a phrase that they're familiar with. So when harassment prevention is then put towards them in a similar structured way, organisations can really feel confident in accessing support and solutions. So the outcome really should be that rather than approaching this topic reluctantly or reactively, organisations feel that they can embrace it with the same confidence and clarity that they would bring to any other sort of continuous improvement cycle or framework within their business. A lot of these businesses will be familiar with PDCA, so Plan, Do, Check, Act, and the C's framework follows a very similar ethos to that as well. So it's an acronym, and it stands for, the C is call it out culture, the E is educate, A is assess your risk, S is strengthen your systems, and E is evaluate and evolve.
So can you tell us about about getting these trademarks and what made that so significant in you and your business's eyes?
Yeah, I mean, for me, registering the C's framework as a trademark is a way of really honouring its uniqueness and protecting its purpose. There is nothing else like this on the UK market. And C's is not just another training programme or another kind of toolkit. It's the first continuous improvement framework specifically designed for preventing workplace sexual harassment. The fact that it's now trademark for me signifies that it's not a trend or a campaign. It really is a structured methodology that has long-term credibility. I've been working with this framework within organisations for the past nearly 2 years now, and I've seen firsthand how it can integrate into wider organisational and internationally recognised standards as well, such as ISO accreditations. And at the same time, I want to stress that it's not about ego. Whilst it's a badge of honour to be a pioneer in this area, and currently, as I've said, the only one really delivering such unique training and frameworks for workplaces, I kind of recognise that alone I can only go so far. I'm a passionate person. I'm a feminist. I'm an activist by nature and by heart, I think. And together we can go much further. So registering the C's framework is really just a first step as well towards developing more intellectual property that can scale. So my sort of mission is not just to create impact through my own work, but to equip and empower others so that impact can extend way beyond what I'm able to achieve as one single person and one small business.
Why is this framework so unique compared to other approaches that we see in the workplace?
Well, I think, as I've mentioned, there's a reluctance to really address sexual harassment at work altogether, and most existing approaches rely really heavily on deterrence. So deterrence is sort of saying, don't do this or you'll face consequences. While deterrents are in place, they do not get to the root cause of why harassment happens and why sexual misconduct happens, nor do they shift organisational culture. Having policies on paper does not shift organisational culture. And we can see this reflected in society as well. So we know that rape is illegal, but actually conviction rates are lower than 3% in England and Wales. Therefore, a deterrent that's not actually backed up by consequences is really insufficient in preventing the sexual violence that is unfortunately quite endemic in our society. So what makes the C's framework really unique is that it doesn't just tell people what to do, it provides a roadmap for what organisations can do step by step to prevent misconduct in the first place at that very root cause level. I think it also recognises that prevention can feel politicised to some people, unfortunately, and given the current political landscape, conversations around sexual harassment and sexual violence often can feel quite polarised, and that can make it difficult or make organisations feel hesitant to take a very clear stance out of fear of saying or doing kind of the wrong thing. And having a continuous improvement framework takes away that fear. It gives employers a practical, structured way to declare zero tolerance and, crucially, actually back it up with a plan as well.
So how does this framework, how does it go about actually working in practice within businesses?
Yeah, so the C's framework functions as a 5-step cycle of continuous improvement. And really, you can enter that continuous improvement cycle absolutely anywhere in those 5 stages. But I guess it starts with building a call it out culture where employees actually feel confident to challenge harmful behaviours. Then it moves into educate, so ensuring all staff and leaders understand the psychology of sexual misconduct, biases, power dynamics, the role of bystanders, for example, moving people from just being bystanders into actually being very active bystanders. The next step is assessing your risk, and this is helping organisations understand not only where risk is most likely to occur, but why harm is most likely to occur there, because only from that place can you then move into starting to do something about it. So harm might be most likely to occur from power imbalances, hierarchical structures, gaps in reporting mechanisms, and really coming back there to the kind of culture that we have and embed as well. From there, organisations can look at strengthening their systems, whether that is embedding policies, processes, or simply having a bit of leadership accountability over these kind of things. And the final stage in the process is evaluate and evolve. So creating those feedback loops to measure effectiveness and refine the approach over time. So really importantly, the framework is underpinned by statistical analysis tools that I've developed that take the temperature of the organisation, you could say. I've been using pre- and post-delivery assessments when delivering training, and this gives companies true insight into both the impact of their efforts and where gaps continue to persist. So that, again, it comes back to that commerciality as well. They're not going to be wasting money. We're not doing a refresher of the same tick box compliance focused training that people click speed times 2 on year after year. We all know because we've all sat and done that kind of e-learning, right? But they're going to get insights that say your highest risk is actually because you've got a real issue with relational power dynamics within your business. So then when it comes to looking at prevention a year on, they can think, okay, we're really going to zone in on this relational power dynamics piece now. And what I would say is, although that this framework is really focused around sexual harassment, and that's what I'm predominantly using it for, it feeds into all different kinds of areas. How much more productive could a team be if they understood the impact of power dynamics and were able to, resolve issues around that? We look at victim blaming. So victim blaming is not something that is exclusive to sexual harassment or sexual violence. The term victim blaming was actually originally coined in the Black rights movement, so back in the 1960s. So a lot of the learning that we do and the way in which this framework can be applied is really broad, and it can have massive organisational impact.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because actually one of my next questions was, what benefits does it bring to an organisation by undertaking this framework, which, I'm sure there's more, but I'd love to hear them, but you've definitely hit on some great ones so far, so I'd love to hear about more of them.
Yeah, The CESE framework benefits are cultural and practical. You should expect to see reduced incidents of harassment, stronger employee trust, and really a culture where people genuinely feel safer and more respected. And from a compliance perspective, it helps employers to understand and meet their needs under the Worker Protection Act, which obviously requires preventative measures, not just deterrence. And this is what I keep trying to drive home. It is no good, and this is no disrespect to some absolutely brilliant solicitors, lawyers out there, but it is no good engaging a law firm to come in and tell your team about the whys and what fors of the law when it comes to sexual harassment, because the Worker Protection Act is not a duty to inform, it is a duty to prevent. So we need to look at what are you doing at the root cause to prevent this from happening in your organisation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. As we mentioned, it's a severe thing that rape and murder are illegal, but they still go on. So there's no point going in and saying you shouldn't be doing that because there is consequences.
Yeah.
We are quite aware of that, and so the perpetrators. So that's a really interesting piece that you've just put on there.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I do say to use as an example is drink driving. So drink driving is illegal. We know that there are some serious consequences. You can go to prison, you can lose your licence, lose your whole livelihood. Nobody wants to be friends with a drink driver, but ultimately, people still choose to engage in that behaviour. And there are severe consequences for that. With sexual assault and rape, the consequences are actually very, very low. As we've mentioned, a conviction rate of lower than 3% in England and Wales. So how could we ever try to rely on consequences as an effective prevention? It's just not a good strategy.
Are there particular industries or types of workplace where you think this would be the most relevant?
The CESE framework is really applicable across all sectors because every organisation that employs people is mandated to comply with the Worker Protection Act. And if you end up in a tribunal and you're found to have not complied with the Act, you can actually face an uplift of 25% on compensation that might come from that case. So, there's a financial thing there to think about. I would say it's particularly relevant in industries that have high pressure environments, so maybe quite sales and performance driven. Places that have strong power dynamics and maybe gender-based occupational segregation as well. So things like male-dominated industries where there's men's jobs for men, women's jobs for women, all the men are welders and all the women are administrators. These are the settings where sexual misconduct can be normalised, overlooked or minimised, and where robust frameworks are quite urgently needed. It's also especially relevant in regulated or accredited environments, including those working towards or maintaining ISO accreditations, as well as FCA regulated businesses too. In these contexts, the risks of sexual harassment and misconduct really are heightened, not only because of a duty of care for employees, but because misconduct is often seen as a warning sign of other issues. If you're allowing that kind of behaviour to fester, are you allowing other non-compliant behaviours or even things such as fraud to happen in your organisation?
I like that, yeah. So it's, if we're having this happen, what else are we not seeing that's happening,
Workplace harassment really persists as a critical issue. Despite decades of awareness. Sexual harassment and sexual violence persists in all its different forms because of systemic, cultural, and even psychological drivers that haven't been addressed. And like we've said, workplaces often mistake deterrents for prevention, and not just workplaces, actually. Lots of different efforts across society are guilty of doing that. And I think on top of that, the political environment can often make conversations about sexual misconduct and violence feel quite polarised and fraught. And that kind of combination leaves businesses feeling really frozen. They don't want to say the wrong thing, so they say and do nothing. But silence really does have a cost, and especially when we're in a competitive landscape for talented people in our organisations as well. So the SEAS framework makes prevention really accessible, really structured, and achievable. It helps organisations achieve it with confidence, and it reframes the issue as something that is an organisational responsibility directly tied to employee well-being, quality, occupational health and safety, trust, and even productivity too.
That's amazing, that, and it's a really good thing that you touched on there, that silence piece. As people always say, that silence speaks volumes. So how does this achievement reflect your broader professional expertise and your mission as such that you're on at OneSource HR?
Yeah, so I guess what makes me distinct as myself as a HR professional is that combination of being my career, my approach has been shaped by being in really quite highly commercial environments, and the whole ethos of my business has been to connect the dots between people, performance and profit. That's what we do at OneSource HR. That's what we do best. And the SEAS framework kind of builds on that philosophy by positioning harassment prevention not as an abstract ideal, but as a structured and measurable driver of cultural health, employee trust, and organisational resilience too. On a personal level, my own life experience has really caused me to pause a few years ago and reevaluate and start to think, how could I bring my skills as a HR practitioner and combine them with my passions in as a feminist and as an activist and as somebody that's really passionate about making the world a better place and freeing women and other minoritized people from oppression, basically. I undertook training with some really qualified specialists that are leading experts in this area and have trained, upwards of 30,000 professionals in the UK, ranging from police officers to social workers. I also had a couple of years where I founded and ran a community interest company where we supported women who'd been impacted by domestic and sexual violence with employability and financial wellbeing resources. So I've got that frontline experience, that commercial experience. I've massively invested in professional and personal development on this topic over the years. And, I bring that combination of a trauma-informed lens as well as a very commercial and business-first lens as well.
Amazing. So the CEAS framework and ISO accreditations, how does that work together?
Yeah, so the SEAS framework, it is a tool for cultural change, but it also can help organisations demonstrate that they're meeting internationally recognised standards. It's a 5-step step continuous improvement cycle, and it aligns directly with things like the ISO standards on diversity and inclusion and ISO 45001 on occupational health and safety, because in that context, harassment is formally recognised as a psychosocial risk. The SEAS framework, it directly supports organisations to meet ISO's PDCA cycle, so that plan, do, check, act, those requirements, because that it provides some specific and structured evidence on harassment as both a cultural and organisational risk. So by embedding the SEAS framework, employers can demonstrate that they are taking a serious commitment to compliance, risk management and continuous improvement.
Amazing. It's really good to see that link there between, accreditations and international standards that the business are having to comply to, and how this really links into them. So what's one piece of advice that you give to employers that are looking at this in the business, realising that they need to do more, but sometimes employers are a bit stuck on where to start, etc. So what would be your best piece of advice for them?
Yeah, so I would say don't ignore this, don't shy away from it. Don't think that just because it's not being reported to you, it isn't happening. It's endemic in society, and your employees are just a small population of society that exist in your organisation. This is not something that can be mended with a tick box. You have got to go a little bit deeper. Now, that doesn't mean that it's got to be overbearing, it's got to be expensive. I am really passionate about the SEAS framework being accessible, and that's why it's a structured tool. I would also say to any HR practitioners as well that, I've worked as a generalist HR professional for 15 years, and the landscape of our profession it's evolving, it's changing. The burden that we have to carry is really quite heavy, right from thinking about people's mental health and mental well-being, looking at things like menopause, looking at things like organisational change and adoption of AI, right through to sexual harassment. You shouldn't be afraid or ashamed of asking for some specialist help in any of these areas, because, as a generalist, it's too much to expect you to be a specialist in absolutely everything. So, just reach out if you've got a question, if you're curious about the SEAS framework, if you think there's something that I might be able to help you with. As you can tell, I'm pretty friendly. I'm from Yorkshire. I'm pretty straight talking. Let's see how we might be able to work together.